WrestleMania is the one time a year where current and returning fans gather to watch the Super Bowl of professional wrestling. The event is filled with current superstars, as well as legends of WWE's past, and even celebrity performances. In this series, I take a look back at some of the WrestleManias that molded us into the fans that we are today. In this episode, we revisit WrestleMania 17. The 17th edition of the granddaddy of them all took place in Houston, Texas at the Astrodome. The names on the marquee were two Attitude-era legends in The Rock and Steve Austin, in what was possibly the most anticipated match of all time. While that was the main draw, the contests before it are a big reason this classic pay-per-view is looked back on so fondly by wrestling fans. The opening match was Chris Jericho vs. William Regal for the Intercontinental Championship. The lead up to this bout had an interesting story. On one hand, Regal was abusing his power as commissioner, stacking the odds against Y2J. To respond, the conquering hero would, yes, actually urinate in the commission's tea. So there's that. A keynote is Jericho entered WrestleMania with an injured shoulder. Early on in the contest, Regal would remove the turnbuckle padding and ram Jericho's bum shoulder into the exposed turnbuckle. Most of this match focused on the injury to Y2J. Even when Jericho would try to apply the walls to Regal, the shoulder would eventually give out. To close out the match, the Ayatollah of Rock and Roll would hit the lion salt for the victory. A cool detail I only picked up on during the rewatch is a small adjustment before the lion salt. Usually Jericho hits his version of a running bulldog before his middle rope signature, but because of how close Regal was to the ropes, Y2J picked up the commissioner and would suplex him further away. In most instances, you see a grounded opponent need to randomly scooch in position, which makes very little sense. Not a lot of time allotted to this contest, but very good in-ring psychology by two excellent workers. The camera cuts to backstage where a car pulls up, and it's Shane O'Mac. This was the beginning seed of what would eventually be the invasion angle, but more on that later. Next, we are taken to another backstage segment where Bradshaw is given an inspirational speech about being from Texas. I think this was done to remind the crowd that Bradshaw was from the Longhorn State because when in a tag team, I don't think the crowd focuses on hometowns as much as they do with single stars. This led right into Right to Censor versus the APA and Taz. Because Farouk and Bradshaw are so big, Taz had to be the tag match workhorse who eats most of the heel team's offense. The isolated babyface segment in this bout was abbreviated. Bradshaw got the home state tag and started to clear the ring. Then the usual six-man tag chaos broke out, with eventually Goodfather eating a clothesline from hell, with the APA and Taz picking up the win. I had to look at the official match time and it ended up being under 4 minutes. As I continue to review Mania 17, you will see a theme with this. There were certain contests that just didn't need to drag out. Get some extra superstars on the show, a quick pop, and let the ass kickers do their thing. After what was essentially a squash for a six-man tag, the next match was a triple threat for the hardcore title. Raven would defend against two much larger adversaries in The Big Show and Kane. What was quite funny is Kane and Raven were fighting for about 2 minutes until Show even was ringside. The Big Red Machine launched Raven onto WWE's largest athlete before the big man could even get in the squared circle. Fun fact for you, Big Show never even made it inside the ropes for the entirety of this match. Raven and Kane start fighting in the crowd with Show on their heels. This title contest was mainly fought in a clearly blocked off backstage area. At one point, Show tried to lock a fenced-in area to keep Kane out, so it was a one-on-one bout with Raven. But that lasted all of 5 seconds. Clearly, Paul White did not watch Bad Blood 97. At one point, golf carts were incorporated. Big Show and Raven drove a golf cart for about 10 feet before crashing at 1 mile per hour. Kane then grabbed a rival cart, loaded the ref on it, pursued both men for about 5 seconds. The last few sentences sound ridiculous, but that's what the Hardcore Championship was about during this era. The match would conclude on the stage of the ramp, where Kane would boot both men off the platform, and then leg drop Big Show because that is the over-the-top ending this contest needed. Kane was the new Hardcore Champ. If you're keeping score, the babyfaces are 3-0. Despite this being the longest match up to this point, it still didn't crack 10 minutes. This was a wise move because there would be classic battles later in the card that would need the time. Eddie Guerrero, accompanied by Perry Saturn, would take on Test for the European Championship. Very quickly, Test executes a powerbomb to Eddie. This almost felt like Diesel, Jackknife, and Bob Backlund for the WWF Championship in the 90s. The difference being, Guerrero was able to get out of the ring and recollect himself. Test had a power advantage that was on display early. The story of this contest wasn't what happened inside, but what happened outside and around the ring. Perry Saturn would interfere a few times. Even when Saturn appeared to be disposed of, Fellow Radicals member Dean Malenko would be enough of a distraction ringside for the referee to miss Eddie striking the champion with the title and securing the win. This was booed at the time, but in the coming years we would adore this type of behavior from Guerrero. Earlier in the night, the camera cut to The Rock entering a locker room and setting his stuff down. For some reason, Austin, when he arrived, sat down in a bathroom. Like there was clearly a paper towel dispenser behind him and a sink to his right. Hey, it's where some people do their best work. The next match was the first really good contest of the night between Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit. The former used an ankle lock to submit opponents, while the latter used a crossface. These two, in the weeks leading up to WrestleMania, were obsessed with making the other tap out. The first 5 minutes were the most grappling heavy start to a mainstream wrestling match I may have ever watched. But it worked. High-level rolling and reversals. The one-upsmanship would eventually end when Angle felt like Benoit was getting the upper hand. He lands a big strike that sends Benoit to the canvas. Once the strikes began, the tone of the match changed. The competitive nature went from holds to knife-edge chops. Just when you thought the story of male ego could not go any further, Angle and Benoit both attempt their counterpart's submission. It looked like the Rabid Wolverine took the Olympic gold medalist's best shot with an Angle slam. Unfortunately for him, there was a low blow missed by the ref and a roll-up for the 3 count while using the tights. This was a great match for what was only around 15 minutes. From Angle mocking the Texas fans pre-match, even mocking the so-called childish choice by the locals to sport cowboy hats. The story and the build to this contest matched the journey that both men told in the bout. Up to this point of the rewatch, I still felt pretty fresh compared to most WrestleManias I attended, up to and including Mania 35, where it felt like a marathon of 20+ minute matches. It is a shame when too much time gets allotted to the undercard that the live audience is gassed midway through the show. So far, this felt like a great paced pay-per-view. Another squash match would take place between Chyna and Ivory for the Women's Championship. The story was whether Chyna's injured neck would hold up after an injury angle was used between the two women a couple months prior. After an attack using the belt, Ivory swung a few times in the direction of Chyna's neck. Once Chyna got back to her feet, that was pretty much the end of Ivory's offense. It was essentially 2 minutes of the ninth wonder of the world doing whatever she wanted to the RTC spokeswoman. Mercifully, the championship bout ended with a gorilla press. Looking back, Chyna in the women's division was such a missed opportunity. The years that preceded Mania 17 saw the ninth wonder of the world competing with the men. I think the idea was that no other woman would look credible opposing her. Considering Chyna's time with the company would come to an end later in the year, she just missed out on good in-ring competitors like Trish and Lita hitting their stride. Either way, this moment at WrestleMania felt like it was a celebration of an important woman to the Attitude Era. The next match was something. This was Vince vs Shane McMahon street fight with Mick Foley as the special guest referee. So the story was basically Vince humiliating Trish until she proved her loyalty, which then led to Vince having an affair with Trish and asking for a divorce from Linda. Linda would then go into a catatonic state. Vince's daughter Stephanie would support him, but then Shane got involved wanting revenge in honor of his mother. Basically, this was the Jerry Springer portion of the show. The chairman would get the brawling edge early. Shane would fight back though. We would see an early Stephanie slap, definitely did not have the same velocity as the ones we would see a decade later. Shane McMahon would introduce the hardcore element of signs, an extension cord, and a kendo stick. One side note, these clearly were not everyday performers, so the punches and kicks looked as rough as you would think. A big turning point would be Stephanie pulling her dad out of the way as Shane would go crashing through the table. Trish then wheels out Linda. They were not out there long before Trish slaps Vince. Then a back and forth happens with Steph and Trish, with the latter chasing the billion-dollar princess up the ramp. Vince hits Foley with a chair twice, and this is where the drama gets good. The elder McMahon sets his wife up in the ring on a chair so she can watch the dismantling of her son. As Vince turned to hit Shane with a trash can, Linda stood up out of her chair, much to Vince's surprise, and kicked him right in the grapefruits. Foley then beat up Mr. McMahon, and Shane would complete the comeback with a coast-to-coast with a trash can to his father's face. I gotta tell you, definitely not a technical masterpiece, but this was so damn entertaining. There was a combination of family dysfunction, multiple exciting high spots by Shane, and the protagonists overcoming their heel adversaries. This was at a time where WWE understood that proper heel versus face balance was the heel gets massive heat, but after a month or two of devious actions, it's time for their comeuppance. TLC 2 would follow the McMahon vs. McMahon showdown, And if you thought the previous contest was a car wreck, you would be in for a treat with this one. Most of you watching this video are very familiar with this match, but for those of you who aren't, it was between the Dudleys, who brought the table portion, the Hardys, who brought the ladders, and then Edge and Christian, that were known for their use of chairs, hence TLC. If you get an opportunity, check out my top 10 WrestleMania match video. Spoiler, this made the list. From what I've heard in a previous interview, I believe it was mainly Matt, Edge, and Christian that planned out the big spots and where they fit in this specialty match. Some of these spots included a Jeff Hardy swanton off a big ladder. Big surprise. We really took the rainbow-haired warrior for granted. An Edge spear to Jeff from off a ladder. And Bubba Ray and Matt flying out of the ring through 4 tables. The most important detail was the third stable member each tag team had. The Hardys had Lita, Dudley's had Spike, and Edge and Christian had Rhino. In most of these clashes between the 3 teams, you could basically eliminate the Hardys because it was a lock that Jeff would be involved in some high risk that he would either take someone out or someone else would take him out. But the biggest difference in this clash at WrestleMania 17 would be Rhino. With all due respect, let's compare stable members. One, while an all-time great female wrestler, was in the ring with much bigger men. Then there was Spike, who was not much bigger than Lita. And then there was Rhino, a near 300-pounder with the nickname The Man Beast. In the closing moment of the match, Edge held on to Devon, then Rhino helped push Christian all the way up the ladder to grab the titles. And everyone else, they were motionless. This is a classic Attitude Era match. Chaotic. Okay, on to the gimmick Battle Royal. This was everything that the Andre the Giant Battle Royal is not. Fun, nostalgic, and doesn't take itself too seriously. Mean Gene Okerlund and Bobby the Brain Heenan called the match. Bobby Heenan is my all-time favorite heel commentator. Some of his lines are ones that stay with you and make you laugh throughout the day.
By the time the Iron Sheik gets to the ring, it'll be WrestleMania 38.
This match had some forgotten mid-carders of wrestling's past. The first elimination was Repo Man. Bummer. The final 4 of this match was the quickest set of eliminations you will ever see. Sergeant Slaughter eliminated Brother Love, Hillbilly Jim then eliminated Slaughter, and then the Iron Sheik eliminated Hillbilly Jim for the win. Slaughter would then attack Sheik after to give a babyface ending, but it really did not need it. Sheik took like 5 minutes to get into the ring. Him winning was hilarious. The co-main event would be kicked off with Motörhead playing Triple H out. We would learn in years to come, this usually is a death sentence for a superstar's chances of winning. Yet again, so is usually facing The Undertaker at WrestleMania. Good physical match, Taker overwhelmed Triple H early, eventually Hunter would have a good power reversal of Old School, which would swing a few minutes of offense in his favor. At one point, Mike Chioda gets knocked down, then after regathering himself counted a 2 after a Taker chokeslam, then an angry American badass would elbow the ref to the back. The excuse for the match continuing was the ref had no idea who hit him, and also the fact that he lied motionless for 15 minutes as these guys fought 40 yards away from the ring. Taker would chokeslam the Cerebral Assassin off a platform onto what just looked like a lot of foam. Both guys worked their way back to the ring. Triple H hit Taker with a sledgehammer during a last ride attempt. Mike Chioda magically returned from the dead, but The Undertaker kicked out. Deadman Inc. would win when he would reverse corner punches into a last ride. This was a very solid match. Hard hitting, a couple false finishes, and a good counter to close everything out. There was a mention of Undertaker being undefeated at WrestleMania after this one, so the company was at the very least aware of this entering the big event. Also, a little funny that in hindsight, the streak should have ended in a DQ in 2001. Okay, main event time. With the most epic promo ever to build a match, My Way by Limp Bizkit, the Astrodome was ready to come unglued. Right before the introductions, it gets announced that this is now a no DQ match, which seems to catch commentary a little by surprise. Stone Cold came out to a massive pop as it was his home state. The Rock came out to a pretty good pop, but once the contest would start, the support would diminish. Austin would attack in the early going as if he was prepared for this to have been no disqualification. The Texas Rattlesnake tried using the belt, was fighting into the crowd, exposed the turnbuckle, and even used the ring bell. At this time, JR and Paul Heyman keep mentioning how random the no disqualification stipulation was. When you hear something like this a second time, it's clear foreshadowing that something's taken place. At a certain point in the match, the People's Champion was able to adjust to no DQ and used the exposed turnbuckle and ring bell in retaliation. At this point, both men are pouring blood all over the place. There was actually a moment where The Rock's cut dries up, and Earl Hebner does the fake check and hands the blade so the Brahma Bull could reopen himself back up. Funny how oblivious I was to this stuff in 2001, but so many years later I look for it. There was a great callback to Mania 13 when Rock would put a bloody Austin in a sharpshooter. The bout felt like any moment the final blow could be delivered when Mr. McMahon moves ringside. His intentions were made clear when he pulled the Rock off of Stone Cold after a people's elbow. Because Austin was that over in Texas, somehow the most hated man in the world 90 minutes prior was receiving cheers because he was helping out the home state hero. The next few minutes there was a lot of McMahon interference. Even with the distractions and chair shots, The Rock kept kicking out. A few more cheers were won over by the People's Champion's resilience on full display. Unfortunately, a bunch of chair shots later, Austin would get the job done. In hindsight, I get The Rock was going away to shoot a movie, so he had to drop the title. But the writing of this match was a huge swing and a miss. Stone Cold hadn't won the championship since he had surgery on his neck, got screwed in a bunch of ways when he came back, went through hell at the Royal Rumble, and with Mania being in his home state, this was the most babyface story I have ever heard of. Even after The Rock got screwed, a lot of fans at the Astrodome were still cheering. Despite my previous statement, when I look back on WrestleMania 17, I think of a near perfect pay-per-view. Anything that could have been considered a bathroom break was under 5 minutes, and most of the premier clashes were in the second half of the card. There would be quick filler matches like Chyna vs. Ivory and the Gimmick Battle Royal that would space things out enough to avoid crowd fatigue. And there is zero doubt what should have been the main event, and it in fact was. This is WrestleMania 17 Revisited.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright.